Scheuerman facing charges. This video showing her slapping a 17-year-old Little Caesars employee in Enid after ordering 2 pizzas and crazy bread.
They didn't have any of the crazy bread. She just kind of went foul about the whole issue.
Attorney Ronald Skip Kelly says the 71-year-old drove up to the window and started calling his client racial slurs.
She proceeds to call him the N-word. She don't just call him the N-word. She prefaces with, "You effing N person."
Then, documents show Scheuerman asked the teen, quote, "Did that hurt you?" When the 17-year-old said no, she got out of the car and slapped him across the face.
You know, if that didn't hurt you, then I'll slap you and see if that hurts you.
This young man did the best that he could do to control himself.
2 weeks later, the 71-year-old charged with a malicious harassment based upon race charge. That charge carries more weight than a standard assault.
What was more painful to him was the fact that it took so long for anything to be addressed in reference to this.
The Garfield County District Attorney not wanting to go on camera, telling News 4 Enid police couldn't arrest Scheuerman because officers didn't witness the misdemeanor with their own eyes.
They had the video. The police department had it. Little Caesars had it.
Police having to pass the case off to the DA so prosecutors could do their own interviews before getting an approved arrest warrant through the courts.
How many people do you have to talk about when you see the person that's the victim and you see the person that is now the defendant doing everything that the victim said happened to him?
Documents show when the manager asked Scheuerman what happened, she said, quote, "I harassed him like I always do," telling police she was just joking around with the kid.
These type of cases would not have taken that long if the parties would have been reversed.
Okay, so y'all just heard that right there. And I'm to give a shout out to Seiji Hito because he was the first person I saw actually talk about this story on his channel. And this whole thing is just like, to say ridiculous will be an understatement. But I say ridiculous because of how it was handled, but it's not shocking nor surprising that this occurred. Now I'm going to try to go based off of what I just heard because it's a 2 minute and 9 second video and a lot was revealed in just that 2 minutes and 9 seconds. So you have this sloppy Michelin man looking individual, and she does look like a man, because if they didn't say it was a woman, I would have swore up and down it was a man, who was in the Little Caesars drive-through line, got upset because they didn't have the crazy bread that she was asking for. And then she calls the person at the drive-through. Mind you, this kid is a minor. He's not even 18. Look, black boy, the N-word. Now, remember, I just talked about how, like, when people say, oh, the N-word and everything, it shouldn't really hurt you and everything like that. Well, here's an instance where the N-word was used and then a slap came behind it. So she called him or the N-word. That was the first thing she did. She called him the N-word from inside of her van. And then she got out and said, "Did that hurt you?" And he said no. So apparently him being called the N-word did not affect him. So she did something more egregious to hurt him. Like, she was going out of her way to do this. And then that's when it went from being verbal to being physical. And you heard what the attorney said. He said that she didn't just call him the N-word. She called him an effing N-word. So she put extra emphasis on that. And then that's when he left off of the screen. Like, if you saw the surveillance, he walks back and I guess he maybe goes to get some manager or something like that. But by that time, she's probably, already gone. The other thing that got me was when they mentioned how it took them 2 weeks to actually charge her with something. 2 weeks. We're talking if we're talking 2 full weeks, we're talking about 14 days in total for them to actually officially charge her with something. Now, granted, they hit her with what appears to be a hate crime charge and not just a simple assault, because it was a simple assault. It would only have been a simple assault if she didn't say that word. But because she did and then followed it up with a physical assault, then that's when they had to upgrade it to what it was. But they said it took 2 weeks for them to actually charge her with anything. Now, we know that if this was, say, an Asian person, an Asian kid that she did this to, the AAPI would have been all over it. Day one. But see what happens when they try to dish out charges on a hate crime level or even low level misdemeanor charges when there's anti-black hatred coming along. Sometimes they don't even hit you with a hate crime. But look at how long it took. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. That's the second thing. The next thing was with the cops. They said, well, we can't really arrest her because we didn't witness him being slapped or him being called the N-word, even though you have surveillance footage from inside of the Little Caesars where the employee was working. And you can see from that viewpoint of this chick get out of her van, come up to the window and slap him. Even if you didn't hear what was being said, you saw what she did when she cocked her hand back and slapped this boy across the face from outside and into the window where he was standing on the opposite side. That was a dumb excuse. It just sounds to me like they just didn't want to handle the situation, which is slack on their part. So I hope that the attorney and this boy and his family go after the police that didn't want to take up this situation, because that just shows you how lackadaisical they are and how anti-black they also are. But that should be of no surprise to anybody at all. No one should be surprised about anything that occurred in this entire situation, from this woman calling him the N-word, from her slapping him, to them taking 2 weeks to charge her with even one thing, to the cops saying we can't arrest her because we didn't actually witness it. And the thing is, they had the video footage, they had the surveillance footage, they gave it to them as evidence. And even after that, they still said they couldn't arrest her. See what I mean? It's where we as black people, we have to always force their hand, because they'll do automatically for other groups, but when it comes to us, we are literally on our own. I remember it was a story, I didn't get around to talking about it, but it was some racism going on down, I believe in Texas, where it was involving some PC students and a black student or whatever. They weren't doing their job. So what ended up happening is that the community, black people had to force their hand in order for them to even charge or arrest any additional party that was attached to the incident. Just like what happened, if you remember what happened in South Carolina, was it last year, a year before, we had that tall, lanky, ex-military PC man try to attack that black boy in that neighborhood in South Carolina. They weren't going to do nothing to him until the community came out and was literally outside of his yard, and he had to escape out the back. Like he was on some kind of Tom Clancy game. Then you can take it even a step further, where you had an incident that happened in New Jersey where you had that PC man get in that black man's face and say something or throw something at him or whatever. And then the community came and was literally outside in droves in front of his house in order to get him arrested. And I think the only reason they did that is because they feared for his safety. But when they had him come out there, it literally looked like Cersei on Game of Thrones being walked through the town butt naked, while the woman behind her was ringing that bell, yelling shame from behind her back, while everybody was spitting and throwing food and drinks at her. Because if you remember the video, I don't know if anybody spit on him, but food and water was definitely thrown his way. Definitely water. There was a lot of water bottles being thrown. One person even jumped up and slam dunked that water bottle on his head. Now, unfortunately, I think the bottle was empty because it kind of just bounced off. But I remember that. But like I'm saying, all that to say is that the only time they really do whatever it is they're supposed to do when it comes to us is when we force them to do that. And while I'm glad that that's happening, it should not be that way. But we already know how they feel about us, and then got the nerve to wonder why we feel the way we feel about them. Amazing, isn't it? And they want to sit up there and try to play dumb. But we'll see what comes of this. But if I think they said this happened in Oklahoma. If I have any Oklahoma subscribers, can y'all please keep me updated about this story, just in case it slips through the cracks, because something tells me it most likely will. After all, this story did happen in March, and it just got reported on the last week of April. So what does that tell you? And that's another thing. While we don't like mainstream media, is they will be late to report on stories like this. They'll keep it under wraps. And then they don't talk about it, and we thinking that's something that just happened. Like, look at how many stories we've had come out in the month of April from stuff that happened like back in January. And we're looking at it thinking that it just happened like that week. They're like, oh no, this video footage was from January. Just like we didn't find out about Breonna Taylor until May. We didn't find out about Ahmaud Arbery until May, and his happened in February. Street happened in March. And then, you know, George Floyd, well, we all found out in real time when it came to him, because you couldn't miss that. But like I said, whenever it comes to stories dealing with us and the anti-black hatred that we get from these others, because it's not just from PC, that's why I just say the others, they are so late to reporting on it because they're trying their best to keep it hidden, because they fear of what will happen if it actually gets out. And that's my take on it. One thing I also forgot to mention is the fourth thing, and this was coming from her, is she had the nerve that when they told her about like why she was being charged the way she is, she said, oh, she says, I know, I do this all the time. It's just a form of a joke. They always love to come back and say that this is a joke. I don't believe that this woman does this all the time. I don't believe that this woman comes up to the drive-thru and just calls this boy the N-word every time she comes to that drive-thru. Because here's the thing, with the drive-thru, that same person is not going to be at the drive-thru every single time you come there unless you know what days they're working. And I highly doubt she knows what days that he works. At least I hope not. Because then that would look a little stalkerish. A lot of stalkerish. But she tried to cover her tracks by saying, oh, it was just a joke. PC loves to hide behind that, oh, it was just a joke line. They love to hide behind that. Not everything is a joke. Well, what is a joke is how she looks. And the fact that the reason she got upset was over some food. That's a joke. I would say it's a running joke, but by looking at her circumference, she ain't running nowhere. She might be waddling, but she ain't running.